Hello, everybody. Today, as part of our kickoff series on change management in the INGO sector, I will be talking with Sarah Ralston. And Sarah and I have known each other for what, about 10 years?
I was going to say maybe 8 or so. Yeah,
Eight, something like that. Sarah is the head of organizational development and accountability at CARE International. And we're going to talk about Sarah's massive experience with change management, which I have been able to observe over that period of time. So let me tell you quickly a little bit about how Sarah and I have interacted and have learned, I feel, from each other. So I have done work myself on change management in NGOs for about 15 years. I find it fascinating work myself. I have a deep admiration for the people who need to design, shepherd, and lead change processes throughout their organizations because it's incredibly complex work. As part of my own career, I was involved as a consultant for a little while with a team at the Maxwell School at Syracuse University when we worked with the CARE's 2020 change management team, the transformational change team at CARE International in the early phases of CARE's 2020 process, somewhere around 2015 to 17.
Yes.
And I was able to watch how Sarah learned about change management and was able to debrief with her at several times. This ultimately resulted in a report to CARE's leadership about the effectiveness of CARE's change leadership and change management in those early phases of CARE 2020. So before Sarah in CARE International was the head of organizational development and accountability, she was already since 2011 actually in CARE in various other capacities. And before that, to my interest, I noticed that you worked on U.S. domestic issues as well. You worked on the Katrina disaster in New Orleans and other parts in the south of America. And my own daughter is at Tulane University, so that spoke to me. And you've worked on other domestic poverty issues here in the U.S. as well, but you're based in Edinburgh.
Yes, correct.
So let's talk about change management. It's such an abstract term for the average NGO person. Tell us a little bit about what do you feel are important components of change management, and what do you do actually on a daily basis?
Yes. So I think that change management is a really hard job to explain to anybody. And actually, it's not even in my job title anymore. It initially was. And I think that was intentional, which I can speak about. But I believe, when we work on change management, I mean, it's that kind of art of both designing for the future, bringing in what's like ahead and around us in whatever space we're in, right? So the stuff that's ahead and the stuff that's around, and the kind of best insights from within. So holding up those spaces and then, shepherding, facilitating, supporting, accompanying leaders at all levels in different parts of an organizational space to move towards kind of a common change objective. So it's vague because a change can be many different things. Often it's a strategy, right? So often the change management is brought in when there's a new strategic planning process. Great, now let's change the organization and move towards that. Or a restructure, we need to restructure in some way because of some pressure. Let's do it let's manage that change or facilitate that change process in a way that brings people along, brings the organization along, brings the systems and the processes along towards that new model or whatever it is. So I think the reason it's vague for people is because it varies widely depending on the change that is aspired to. So I think it's really about stepping in at a point in time when there is a big change, and or continually, and I think this is more than the trend and the norm these days, bringing an organization into an adaptive process of regularly changing, but towards some clear, common objective that's kind of, in the future, right? Towards something. And doing it in a way that really has sight of the whole of the organization and all aspects of it. So that's actually why, once we were kind of phasing out our change project team, we decided not to take that approach again, and to actually build in an ongoing organizational development and change role that continually was looking at areas where the organization needs to adapt, continually bringing in new insights and foresights, from those around and ahead and from internally as well, and making sure that the organization has that capacity to regularly adapt its systems, its processes, its recruitment practices, it's the types of people we hire, its strategies, its frameworks, et cetera. So I think that lens on the whole system is the most important, for me, aspect of change management, how you have an eye on the entire kind of ecosystem in an organization and all of the different parts that need to be, this lever to pull to move this piece in that direction, and this influencer to engage in order to move that part forward in one way. So it's a little bit of a kind of an art of chess or whatever, where you're really moving the different pieces around, but towards that common aim or common goal. So that's, I think, how I understand change management. I think in terms of a day-to-day basis, it hugely varies. A lot of it is design work, so really kind of thought leadership work, bringing in, as I said, usually drawing on the insights of people within the organization, usually kind of pockets of progressive change that you're trying to really bring the rest of the system along around, insights from other organizations, insights on kind of evolving trends and the implications those may have on an organization. So it's a lot of that thought leadership and design work. And then I think probably more than anything, it's political influencing and engagement. So it's that real kind of an advocacy, influencing, almost campaigning mindset for how you would approach kind of the dynamics, power dynamics really in many ways within a system, and how to facilitate or bring about all of the different players, understanding the kind of, potential pockets of resistance and why. The champions, the systems that may be a particular barrier or a policy that may be holding us back. So it's not just about people, it's also about the architecture of the system. And so that designing, engaging with people to really unpack and dive into kind of detail around a particular issue that needs to be addressed or evolved. And really that constant working with teams, working with leaders across the organization to understand and embody and live what you're moving towards. So it's a real mix of the day-to-day. I don't think any one day looks like any other, but I think it's a lot of that influencing mindset and kind of political navigation that's really critical.
Interesting, very interesting. We may have time, or maybe not, to get back to your emphasis on political engagement, campaigning, internal campaigning, influencing. Let's see. So you've already told me basically what you think is the most rewarding about the art and science of change management, I think. But are there other things you'd like to say about that?
Well, rewarding, yes. I mean, I think when you're able to see a tipping point reached, and oftentimes you may be the only one that sees it. So it's often not the kind of big moments like boom, a new strategy's endorsed, or, hooray, a new, whatever. But I think it's those kind of combination of lots of little things that when you see them add up, you realize actually there's been a tipping point in a certain direction that we can't go back on. And how it unfolds or evolves is who knows, right? There'll be dips and turns along the way, but there's no kind of reversing. I think that for me is the most rewarding and encouraging, because you can see those moments, and that systems view that you're able to have is a gift, really, because you are able to see, when people working on change management are set up well, they're given that sight into the whole ecosystem and are really able to understand, what's holding back from a particular change, what's really making it move, and how to then advance it. And so that insight is a gift, and very few people are able to have that within their organizational space. I think that's certainly rewarding. The other thing that's most rewarding is working with, I would say, the kind of gift of working with the progressive edges. So those who are genuinely living, testing, trialing, leading change, and being able to learn from and observe and just benefit from being able to kind of hold up their efforts and bring the rest along. I think that has given me so much learning and wisdom and just insight to human behavior and organizational behavior and dynamics that I will always treasure and value. And so I think that learning opportunity, that constant opportunity to learn something new is a huge benefit from these.
It's very stimulating, and I can see how the very daunting aspect of change management, for instance, only one, the fact that you have to have that whole of organization perspective. Sure. I can see how you have really applied systems thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
Very much to that challenge. So the mirror to my question about what you find most rewarding is, what do you find most trying? So not so much most complex, because there's tons of complexity.
It's all complexity.
What is most unrewarding or trying or frustrating about it?
I think trying is politics, right? Always. I mean, for me, it's both rewarding in that, when you do see kind of a breakthrough or a shift, but I think trying just in terms of the level of energy and effort that is probably spent more on the kind of political dimension within an organization that really is almost outbalanced in terms of the design work that really needs to be done, or kind of culture and behavior changes, which are obviously connected to the political, but warrant their own, significant attention, or system changes, whatever it is. I think that the politics of an organization, those in position of power and authority, and often governing bodies in particular, I think that is the area I've learned most about, learned how critical and important it is. And I do think has taken more attention and effort than I ever would have expected. And so I think that space is trying for me personally, because it feels like there, and I think in care at least, there's some real positive signs of more adaptive behaviors in terms of how we think about governance, which is encouraging. But I think that we've inherited or adopted a lot of large, international, transnational organizations have adopted governance models from, other sectors that may or may not be fit for purpose for civil society organizations, and particularly for a really kind of dynamic, agile, changing world. And so I think at times it feels like the amount of energy and time that's spent on bringing along governing bodies can feel like it's really slowing the pace of change. So for me, that has been significantly frustrating, that pace issue, and trying, although I think now that I'm seeing some real breakthroughs in that regard in care, and some difference in behaviors, and you also see the value if you're able to set it up right. There's huge value, but I think that's an area that all international civil society organizations are going to need to really think strategically about as we look to the next decade, is our governance models, how decisions are made, where and how that's set up to be much more regularly changing and adapting than I think we have historically done.
That is an interesting topic that I would love to get back to you on during a separate series of episodes about governance in our sector. So I'm going to remember that.
Yes.
So as you know, there are tons of frameworks and concepts and tools that are bandied about. Many come from the private sector when it comes to change management, but not all. Are there any ones that stand out for you as being helpful in the care setting in the last 5 to 8 years, or do you say no, we're not really using any, we're just following our guts?
So I think it depends on the change topic, if you will. So I make extensive use. I regularly am kind of scanning practices from other organizations, both within and external to our sector, online spaces. I kind of have some, spaces you regularly track or follow. But I think for me, I think there's been a tendency to kind of say, oh, this is a change management framework, let's adopt it and move. I don't think that works really well for the level of complexity that organizations face anymore in terms of change. I think it is much more about knowing your organization, your culture, the best and worst of you, and what it is you're trying to change to, and then being able to bring in the right external framing at the right moments to kind of support or facilitate movement in that regard. So one example is that we, right now within care, we're really looking at kind of designing a couple of spaces within the organization that are kind of new models of collaborating. So not to get into too much detail, but kind of collaborative models, right? So for me, being able to bring in a couple of frameworks and kind of principles for effective kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration, collaboration for systems impact. I drew a lot on the kind of collective impact forum, which actually comes out of the US. They've got some great frameworks to think about collaborative models. So I'm able to look at those and bring in, here are 5 principles, and I rarely bring in a framework or send a link to anybody, right? There's a few thought leaders in the organization that I send actual articles around to or whatever, but usually it's weaving them into meetings, to agendas, to facilitation, to workshops, right? And saying, okay, we're talking about collaborative models, and somewhere midpoint through, here is kind of 5 principles of effective collaboration that I found helpful to think about. What are some ways that what we're talking about matches those, and what are some ways that it's different? And I think that frameworks are always helpful. External frameworks are always helpful to kind of provide some organizing logic based on a lot of, research and experience. I don't think bringing them in wholesale is very often valuable. I'm sure it is at times.
And it's also, would you say it's also often resisted in our sector?
Yes, I do. I think it depends on who. I think some of our kind of top executives really value them and kind of can read them where they're at and kind of apply them. But I think most layers down from that, it just doesn't feel, unless it's made kind of directly relevant or speak directly to kind of their work, it feels esoteric or kind of, so I think that though I use them often and regularly, and I don't feel like I have a kind of a useful way of saying this one or that one. I'm constantly scanning and drawing on them, but I'm building them in as tools to facilitate existing conversations and help kind of prompt new thinking about what's already underway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, got it. Well put.
The one thing I will say, just really quickly, the one thing I do draw on heavily, however, is design thinking, because I think there is a lot of tools out there about how to kind of apply kind of, human-centered design thinking, or processes for innovating, processes for regularly experimenting, testing, learning, and adapting. There's a lot that's come out of kind of the startup space, that's and the kind of tech world that's actually now been adopted and picked up by, innovation sectors, or kind of more experimental models, that I think has been extremely valuable to bring in to the organization and use as methodology. So I think rather than, sharing them as frameworks, I kind of build them in as methodological approaches.
As an approach. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So Sarah, how have you learned how to get better at change management, if it is a set of skills and mindsets? And how has CARE as an organization tried to get better at learning?
That's a great question. So for myself, I think a lot of trial and error, a lot of experiential learning, and also I think probably a lot of reading and filtering. I mean, I think that's a regular, that, getting outside your kind of echo chamber, and your own brain, and kind of really being involved in collaborative conversation and kind of reading spaces, with others, has been critical. But I think for me, more than anything, it's having kind of regular conversation partners with the right mix of people along the way. And I would say about half of those conversation partners are outside of the organization, and have really been critical accompaniers as we change and evolve. And as I, almost provide reflective space, change management can feel very lonely when you're kind of involved and in the thick of it. It can feel very heavy. And I think that's almost therapeutic space to be able to process and reflect and kind of hear from others. You playing that role for a period of time, and we've had 2 or 3 others along the way as well, that for me has been invaluable. I think that then also having a real kind of a real kind of solidarity group within the organization that's regularly involved in thinking, talking, processing, working together on these issues, for me has been the greatest kind of gift, within the organizations, to be able to set that up and really nurture that, benefit from it, leverage and learn from kind of and it's never going to be a big group, but kind of a small core crew of people who really have the eye on the change that we're moving towards, and are really trying to kind of influence and learn and evolve in that direction. So yeah, I think those spaces have been critical. I think within CARE, I think we, once again, you get better at changing by changing. So I think—
Tell me more about that.
I think that I think, every organization, I think we're moving away from those big bang change moments. We'll always have those, cyclically, every organization does. But I hope those are further and further between. I think that recognition that in a very rapidly changing world, full of complexity, and that if you're going to be opportunistic in the best sense of the word, to continue to kind of achieve your mission, whatever it may be, or your goals or whatever, that agility, it's a kind of an overstated word these days, but that just ability to pivot, when you need to, and just continually be saying, oh, we're learning this, let's build it in. Oh, we're learning that, we need to build that in. Oh, we're learning this, we need to change that, requires a level of dexterity that I think we're getting better at. So as the more we change, the better we're getting at being, at changing more frequently, more quickly, and having more insight into the types of changes we need to make.
And so you really see that across care, as large and complex as the organization is, you see that dexterity increasing over, at least over the span of your time with care.
I do at this kind of systems level. I think that a lot of colleagues, and obviously it also depends on your kind of perspective, right? So I'm kind of looking at a decade horizon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think we are getting better and faster and quicker and more nimble. I think partly that's because we've paid a lot of attention to governance, and how that adapting more quickly and being, more attentive to governance, can help the organization, the kind of whole systems changes that need to regularly happen, rather than treating those once a decade or once every 20 years or whatever. It's those little things that you do every year that
Mm-hmm.
actually are what move an organization that is, big and complex and kind of a historical brand and all the things that mean that change isn't easy.
Yeah.
So I think it's those combinations of all the little things. And I also think we've built in methodologies where we look to kind of the third horizon, the kind of line of sight that's the future, and try to cast the net out there, but are really concrete and tangible about the steps we're taking now to experiment and evolve, and that we won't have all the answers as we go. So I think that approach, we've really been able to kind of, I don't know, bring ownership and not complete consensus, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly majority trend is to adapting that type of a posture, rather than kind of overly kind of scientifically engineering change, and plans. And so I think that's not satisfying always for everyone, but I see it as a really positive shift, that means we're going to be better set up to continuously evolve, as the world continues to get more complex and our role in it becomes more complex, as we go.
Really interesting. So we're getting to the end of our time here. So maybe my last question will be, if people want to follow you, you actually told me before we started this interview that you're about to start a transition, a change yourself in your career. But where can people find out more about you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, so that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
I am leaving care in a couple of weeks, actually, and moving to a new role, with a firm working with multinational corporations on issues of emerging ethics and corporate social responsibility. So I'm very excited about that, to be able to look at change from a different space, different conversation partners, different sector. And I think probably for now, given that I'm in kind of an organizational transition space, LinkedIn is an easy way.
Is the best way
to be, absolutely be in touch.
Super. Well, I have so much enjoyed hearing you reflect aloud about your decade of experience with change management. I'm so impressed by the fact that you've been able to develop that whole of organization perspective, that systems perspective, that you haven't drowned in the complexity on it, that you haven't become chronically discouraged by the fact that sometimes things go very slowly, sometimes, or frequently actually, it can be 2 steps forward and at least 1 step back.
Absolutely.
Sometimes the politics and it can be discouraging, but you clearly have developed an enormous amount of knowledge, and I want to thank you for sharing that today with us.
Absolutely.
And I wish you all the best in your next phase in your career. It sounds exciting to me, and I definitely intend to keep following you. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Tosca. Great speaking.